I think that the critics reviewing Five Nights at Freddy's 2 are Okay, so maybe I should calm down a little bit, but we seriously need to talk about critics' reviews of Five Nights at Freddy's 2. Hey, what's up everybody? My name's Bailey, and today I want to talk about some of the issues that I have with critics' reviews of Five Nights at Freddy's 2. And before anybody goes down to the comments and starts typing, you just can't take criticism of your favorite franchise. That is not what this video is at all. I promise, I am fully aware that this movie is not perfect. In fact, it is far from it. But the patterns that I noticed while reading reviews were something that I needed to talk about. Before we go any further, I want to give a very big spoiler warning for this video. If you haven't seen Five Nights at Freddy's 2 and you plan to see it in theaters soon, and you do not want to be spoiled, click off of this video because I will be talking about the movie in detail. You have been warned. After leaving the theater on Thursday night, I quickly went to Twitter. I had been avoiding it all day because I didn't want any spoilers, and I was so excited to see what other people had to say about the movie. I had absolutely loved it. It was funny, the perfect amount of scary for me personally, and entertaining the entire time. I had cried at the ending and sat in shock as the credits rolled, so you can imagine my surprise when I saw that critics were giving it awful reviews. And not just, it was an okay movie type of reviews, more like this movie killed my firstborn child. I decided I was not going to read them that night because I didn't want to spoil the good mood that I was in, but the following morning I was like, what the heck, let's just see what these critics have to say, and that is where this story begins. Also, a quick side note, I do have my notes on my monitor, so if you see me kind of like looking down, that's what I'm looking at. The first review of Five Nights at Freddy's 2 that I had the displeasure of reading was from Leo Brady on his website, amovieguy.com. While scrolling through critics on Rotten Tomatoes, Brady's just happened to stand out to me, and I guess it's a good thing it did, because if I hadn't read it, I might not be making this video. Brady rates FNAF 2 2 out of 4 stars, saying, "It delivers something so incoherent that audiences may find themselves Googling, 'What did I just watch?'" Which is a pretty harsh criticism, in my opinion. However, Brady exposed himself in the very next sentence when he describes the death of Charlotte in a blatantly wrong way. Brady writes, "The film opens with a flashback to the original Freddy Fazbear's, a Chuck E. Cheese-style establishment, where a young girl is murdered by a new character called the Marionette." Now, this would be a pretty decent description if it was actually what happened, but the Marionette didn't kill Charlotte, Afton did. We watch as Charlotte walks towards the exit sign, carrying the young boy she just saved, and see the yellow rabbit close behind, knife in hand. The screen goes dark before Charlotte stumbles out onto the main stage. She screams and falls to the floor, dropping the boy and revealing 3 bloody stab wounds in her abdomen region. Then the trapdoor opens up. Charlotte disappears into the opening, and the Marionette rises, gently cradling Charlotte's dead body. This is an amazing parallel to the games in my opinion, and I did really like the way that they adapted the puppet Charlie storyline for the movie. But the fact that Brady's description was so inaccurate really calls into question the validity of the rest of his review. Even after Henry explicitly states that Afton murdered Charlotte when he's having his conversation with Mike,
she was murdered by him.
Somehow Brady still didn't understand. Although one really should not have to listen to Henry say it out loud to be able to understand what happened. It is made very clear through that opening scene that Afton killed Charlotte, and the fact that Brady didn't understand this really invalidates his review in my eyes, because either he has the media literacy of a walnut, or he was just not paying attention during the movie. Either way, he clearly did not understand it, and therefore his review should not be considered as valuable in any way. So tell me again, Leo. Should the audience be Googling, "What did I just watch?" or should you be actually paying attention to the movie that you're reviewing? And this was only the beginning of the awful reviews that I saw about this movie. Not just bad because they didn't like it, but poorly explained, emotionally charged reviews that didn't substantially criticize anything. And yes, I am also being emotionally charged. However, the difference is that I am not trying to pass myself off as a professional. I think my biggest issue with the way a lot of critics are reviewing Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is that they're caring more about logic than anything else, complaining about how it isn't realistic that Mike and Abby wouldn't have known about the first Freddy's location in a movie where ghosts are real, as just one example, feels disingenuous. They don't actually care about logic or realism, they just didn't like the movie, because it isn't made for them, and they have to come up with some reason for why they don't like it. There were also multiple critics who were very hung up on the fact that Freddy's was even able to open a franchise location after the events that took place in the first restaurant. And while this is explicitly explained in the movie, I will explain it again for anybody who might not have understood. This is a reoccurring concept in the FNAF universe, something that has been a part of the game's lore since the beginning. A lack of concrete evidence, citizen naivety, and pure dumb luck combined to allow William Afton to get away with his murders. Fans have theorized many different explanations for exactly how he was able to evade authorities, and I really don't think that it's that unrealistic, especially the specific events that took place in the movie. I just really don't think it's that unrealistic that somebody in the 80s would be able to get away with a crime like this. It happened all the time in real life, and it still happens to this day in 2025. There are so many children who go missing or are murdered, and their killers are never caught. This is a movie that establishes that the parents in Freddy's really were not paying attention to what was going on around them. And whether or not the beginning scene took place exactly as we are seeing, I don't know. It could have been skewed through the lens of Charlotte's eyes, but any sensible parent, I feel, would have immediately stopped what they were doing if a girl came up to them saying, there's a boy who needs help. So I feel like we already have to understand the mindset that the people in the pizzeria that day had. When Charlotte stumbles out of the curtains and falls over, her bloody back is only in view for a moment before she falls. And with the way that McKenna Grace's character Lisa talks about things, as well as how the newspaper clippings that we see describe the events, the truth regarding Charlotte's death was not widely known. We see newspapers with headlines saying that Charlotte went into a restricted area, basically blaming her for her own death. So while the pizzeria is closed down, I don't think that it's too far-fetched to believe that Afton, the charming businessman who was seemingly a well-respected member of the community, would be able to open future locations once the dust settled. As a specific example, I want to go over a review that was really hung up over the logic side of things. Now, I'm not sure I'm going to say the last name right, so I'm just going to call him Mark for this section. But Mark Do6 review, which he posted on his website, markreviews.com, was strongly critical of every aspect of the movie, and he didn't even attempt to maintain professionalism, in my opinion. You can tell from the very beginning that he wasn't going into this with an open mind at all. He didn't like the first movie, and he doesn't seem to really be a fan of the games, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does kind of help to understand like what the critics' mindset would be and if they are going to be able to understand the movie fully. The first sentence of the review reads, "There's more of everything that didn't work in the original movie in Five Nights at Freddy's 2, and even less of what might have made this clever premise entertaining." And on the topic of logic, Mark goes beyond complaining about the things that I've already talked about, but he also stretches the truth to complain about anything that he can. He writes, "Even though Mike asserts that the animatronic puppets were thoroughly disposed of after the events of the previous movie, they look in pretty good shape when they show up as a literal Deus Ex Machina during the climax. Except Mike didn't ever say that the animatronics were thoroughly disposed of. He tells Abby that they're broken, and in the scene that Abby is sitting in the pizzeria and he walks in and they talk, he explicitly says he doesn't know where they are. He says something along the lines of, there's pieces of them here and there, but to me, that line just felt more like he was trying to come up with something to say because he didn't really know where they were and he was trying to answer Abby's question to the best of his ability. And if he really did think that they were thoroughly disposed of, why would he have then gone back to the pizzeria to ask for their help at the end of the movie? Mark also takes issue with the fact that the people at the festival or science fair do not question the animatronics walking around, blatantly disregarding that multiple characters think the animatronics are just people in suits. And it also doesn't really seem like the people in town know what happened at Freddy's. Mike's aunt was committed to a mental hospital for talking about it. The kids on the bus don't actually believe Abby's story. And the movie really clearly explains to the viewer that nobody knows about the truth of Freddy's. So why would the people be scared of the animatronics walking around? To most people in the town, all they know of Freddy's is that it used to be a pizzeria, and there was some sort of mysterious circumstances leading to it closing, and now it's just a ghost story. The last complaint I have with a lot of critics' reviews is that they didn't think the movie was scary enough. They complained that the movie was trying too hard to cater to a young adult audience, but all I really see here is that the movie just isn't made for the middle-aged men that are criticizing it. The Five Nights at Freddy's games have never been incredibly scary, gory, etc. This was something that I saw people talking about after the first movie as well, saying that it wasn't scary enough. But I just don't really see why a Five Nights at Freddy's movie would be that scary. The FNAF books are definitely detailed and scary at times, but the whole gimmick of the games is that they're based around jump scares. Jump scares which are all throughout the movie, giving them the same level of horror that the games have. I can understand where critics are coming from, but I just don't think it's fair to compare this movie to other horror movies in this way, because all horror movies are going to have different levels of horror in them. As I was scrolling through Rotten Tomatoes, I was absolutely shocked to see a review that was 0.5 out of 4 stars. This was Jack Martin's review for his website Film Feeder, and just when I thought the reviews couldn't get worse, Martin swooped in to prove me wrong. One of his biggest arguments is just that the movie isn't scary. Martin writes, "This is an extremely tame horror that seems to be made almost exclusively for children, acting as some sort of gateway into the far more creative and terrifying world of horror cinema." Well, yes, Martin. It is made for children. This is not meant to be the most creative and terrifying movie in the horror genre. I think that this is something that so many critics just fundamentally do not understand. Hi, Editing Bailey here. I just wanted to quickly make an addition because I feel like what I was trying to say didn't come across right. I do think that the critics understand that Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is gateway horror. It's more so that it seems like they don't think that gateway horror as a subgenre should exist. That their complaints about it not being scary enough, there not being enough gore, there not being enough blood, not seeing things happen on screen is more so them saying that there shouldn't be horror that is made for younger audiences. Gateway horror shouldn't exist. It ruins the horror genre. And, that is an opinion that they can have if they want to. But I feel like if that is what they think, they just should not be reviewing Five Nights at Freddy's 2 because they know going into it that it is made for children. This is not supposed to be some super scary movie, especially for adults. He complains about the lack of blood and how many of the scary moments happen off screen, which again, just means he's going into the FNAF movies with the wrong expectations. Horror movies that are rated for a younger audience are not gonna show someone getting their head torn off. And that is okay. I think his only semi-valid point regarding how scary it is based on his dislike of the toy animatronics. I personally don't mind the shiny toy look, but I can understand how people wouldn't find it that scary. As a smaller side note, I really disliked the way a lot of critics talked about the FNAF fandom as a whole. Just because you don't understand the games or the franchise, it doesn't mean that the fans are in the wrong for enjoying things. It seems like everything these days that has a strong fan base is just shit upon by adults who don't get it, and that really sucks. Let teenagers and kids have interests, and don't make fun of the young adults that have grown up and still enjoy it. Nobody goes around complaining that Disney movies are just for kids. Well, okay, actually maybe some people do, but you get what I'm saying. So why is it so bad that the target audience might enjoy the movie? These critics are putting themselves up on a pedestal, acting as though their opinion matters more than the fans. And I think that as a whole, society really needs to reevaluate why it considers certain media more valid than others. Overall, this is kind of just something that I'm seeing with all of these different sections of the video as I was writing the script. It really just felt like the critics were disregarding that young audiences might enjoy something and saying that if an adult doesn't like it, therefore it's bad. And I don't know. I just don't like that. Now, because I spent so long berating critics, I thought I would put a section here towards the end where I give credit to those who gave thoughtful, meaningful reviews, even if they may not have enjoyed the film themselves. I understand that this movie isn't going to be everyone's cup of tea, and it is far from perfect. And I'm able to accept low reviews as long as they feel fair. First up, we have a review by Louisa Moore for Screen Zealots. In this review, Moore discusses the weak points of the movie while also acknowledging that she is not the target audience. The best way to sum up her review is with one sentence where she says, "I just didn't get the movie in the way that the die-hard fans most certainly will." She accurately describes the plot of the film, something that is unfortunately not a given, and similar to Martin, I can understand why she didn't enjoy the toy animatronics. This is something that even the FNAF community has had debates over, whether or not the toy animatronics are scary enough. And I also agree with a lot of her analysis about Abby as a character. I don't necessarily think that Rubio's performance was the issue, but I think that there are some inconsistencies in the way that Abby's character is written, where sometimes she feels older, sometimes she feels younger. So I agree with what she says there about how Abby's behavior feels a little too immature for an 11-year-old. Ultimately, what I appreciated the most about Moore's review is that she didn't make it seem like it would be a bad thing for fans to enjoy the movie. This is a great review in my opinion. A critic who criticizes the issues of the film without being a pompous asshole. I also appreciated the review by Luis Pomales Diaz written for Horror Press. He discussed how it was overall an entertaining film, a little silly at times, but lacking in some ways. I admit he had good points when discussing how the movie leans heavily into fan service, but I also think that we just kind of have to expect that. He talks about the weak points of the film, such as underutilizing Matthew Lillard and Skeet Ulrich's characters, which I completely agree with. The best part of this review, in my opinion, is that he clearly understands the purpose of these films. Towards the end of the review, he writes, "To simply be entertaining gateway horror is fine. I don't think there's a screaming necessity for these to be masterpieces." Now, I feel as though it isn't fair for me to complain about the way that critics reviewed the movie if I don't give some of my own thoughts. I am a huge fan of the franchise, and I have been for a decade, but I will admit that I am not the most knowledgeable about lore. I know a lot, but I'm sure that if I was quizzed, I would get certain details wrong, so please take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. Overall, my review is based mainly on vibes and how the movie made me feel more than anything else. Story and plot-wise, I think that there were a lot of parts of the movie that had wasted potential. I wish that Henry had played a larger role. I really would have preferred if the conversation that Mike had with him over the phone had been something that we had seen in the movie itself. That's kind of what I was assuming was going to happen from the clip we had from the trailer, but instead their first time meeting was on the phone, and I don't know. I think that would have been a really cool scene for us to actually see. Even if it was on the phone, but we got to see both of their points of views, something like that. I don't know. I just think that would have been really cool. I also wish that the beginning of the movie had been longer, or that we had just had a little bit more there to give a bit more backstory. But as I said earlier, I did really like the way that the Charlie puppet storyline was adapted. And I thought that Charlotte's body being raised up in the arms of the marionette was such an amazing scene. I really liked that part of the movie. I've seen a lot of varied opinions on the Charlotte storyline, but I'm actually not opposed to the direction that it went in the movie. I think it's kind of interesting to have the roles reversed, have Charlotte be more of the vengeful spirit, and the Golden Freddy child be more of what the puppet was like in the games. But the biggest wasted potential in my eyes is Michael Afton and Fazfest. I think that Michael as the main protagonist would have been far better than Charlotte. I just didn't really think it made sense as to why Charlotte was attacking the specific parents that she did, and it probably would have made more sense overall if Michael was directing the animatronics to commit a massacre at Fazfest rather than just having them attack a couple of random parents. This was probably the biggest bit of fan service that felt out of place because Michael was really just there for no reason, in my opinion. And I'm just kind of hoping that things are maybe tied together in the third movie. I don't know. I just think that there was so much wasted potential with Michael Afton as a character, and I would love to make another video expanding upon that if anybody wants to watch it. If there is one thing that we have to remember about the FNAF franchise, it's that you really cannot come to conclusions until an arc is complete. So I feel like we can't fully be upset at the way that the movie went until we have the third one. Now, for the games, I feel like it made a little bit more sense, or it worked better that way. Obviously, with a movie, people want to know what's happening, but I'm not super upset that things were confusing. I don't know. Overall, it felt like too much was trying to be done in too short of an amount of time. I was a bit disappointed that they didn't dive deeper into Vanessa's dreams. The casual viewer probably didn't even understand why she placed the items on the shelf like she did, because there was no explanation. And it was a bit underwhelming that she was able to successfully confront her father on the first try. I would have loved to see maybe 2 or 3 dreams that built up to that moment and also gave us a bit more information about her childhood. And these dreams could have also tied back into Charlotte if they wanted to have that opening scene be short and dramatic like that. They could have used more of Vanessa's dreams to try and give us a bit more information about that. And lastly, the ending. Some parts I enjoyed, some I did not. I didn't actually mind the animatronics from the first movie coming to the rescue. I thought it was a really cool moment that showed the genuine love that the kids had for Abby. But I know a lot of people didn't like it. They think it's a cop-out. To each their own. But the way that Mike acted, not just in the final scene, but also earlier in the movie, was something that really bothered me. I am the world's biggest hater of the miscommunication trope. And whenever I see something in a movie or TV show that feels like in real life, somebody would just interrupt and say, "Stop talking and listen to me. Let me say what I'm trying to say." And then everything would get cleared up. I'm like, why aren't they just doing that right now? Why are they why would Vanessa not fully explain what she's trying to say? So the fact that Mike and Vanessa do not understand each other's points of view, and Mike especially doesn't listen to Vanessa, was really frustrating. And at the end of the movie, when Mike tells Vanessa to just leave them alone after she tried her best to be helpful, it really annoyed me. The writing was a bit cheesy at times, but it was decent overall, and the animatronics looked amazing. Overall, I would give the movie a 4 or 4.5 out of 5 stars. Could it have been better? Absolutely. But was it still a very entertaining movie that I enjoyed regardless of the lore implications, plot holes, and illogical moments? Yes, 100%. When I saw the movie on December 5th, the theater was comprised of about one-third teenagers, young adults, one-third middle school age children, and one-third parents who had to drive their kids. And when I tell you that these kids were having the time of their lives, I am not joking. There was laughter, there were screams, and there was a lot of cheering and excitement. I also saw the movie the night before, on the 4th, and that night the theater was filled with mostly adults. On that day, nobody really screamed. There were definitely jumps at various jump scares, but reactions were different. People politely chuckled at the jokes and gasped when warranted, but overall the reactions were more subdued in comparison to the following night. However, both nights after the movie ended, I saw people talking about how much they enjoyed it. I saw tears, fans talking about lore implications, and a general good reception. So I just don't think it's reasonable for these critics to be complaining about things such as how scary it is or saying that it isn't funny. Because frankly, at the end of the day, it just isn't made for them. Not everything has to be for everybody, and that is okay. If things were watered down too much to appeal to the widest general audience possible, I don't think that the reactions I was seeing would have been the same. I think it would have alienated a lot of the people who are most deserving of enjoying the movie. The fans who were showing up in cosplays, who were excited and frankly, some of them being a bit too excited, yelling stuff out while the movie was happening, but talking about how much they genuinely enjoyed FNAF as a franchise. And I don't know, I just think that the way that these critics were talking about it as if it was just awful because it didn't fit their perfect standards was just not right. Before the script was a YouTube video, it was a much more politely worded email that I was going to send to Leo Brady, pointing out the mistake he made when discussing Charlotte's death. But as I read more and more reviews, I just noticed a consistent pattern of critics fundamentally misunderstanding the purpose of the FNAF movies and holding this movie to too high of standards. While I only name dropped and dissected a handful of reviews in this video, there were so many more that had the same issues. I'm only going to link the ones that I personally talked about just because if I linked everything, it would make the description box way too long, but I will also include a link to the Rotten Tomatoes page if you want to go and read them yourself. I'm obviously not trying to send hate to these critics, but rather pointing out that so many of them are criticizing a movie without taking into consideration that they are not the target audience, which leads to reviews that frankly feel a little silly. So many of the issues they have are things that the FNAF community as a whole has already discussed and moved on from. The toy animatronics not being scary enough, how Afton got away with murder, etc., etc. And I suppose that this is the price that we have to pay as a community now that our silly, goofy Scare Bear game is mainstream. On a more positive note, I have seen pretty overwhelmingly that fans and the general communities online enjoyed the movie. While there are definitely people in the community that disliked the movie, I have seen more often than not positive reviews from the people whose opinions actually matter. Another quick editing note, but this time quieter because it's late at night. I'm realizing that this sentence sounds so bad. I meant that the critics' opinions don't matter, not that the people in the community who disliked the movie, that their opinions don't matter. Yeah, okay. Hopefully that makes sense. I think that it is really telling when you look at the difference between critics rating and audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes. 13% for critics, but 88% for fans. Some of the other rating websites show that people have a bit more mixed reviews, and I feel like that makes sense. It definitely wasn't a perfect movie. But in the end, that is not what this video is trying to say. I'm not trying to claim that the FNAF 2 movie is amazing, peak cinema. I'm mainly trying to point out that critics are really not able to properly review the FNAF movie, and maybe we shouldn't give their opinions too much thought. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much. This is so far off from the usual content that I make, but I have so many thoughts about FNAF in general and this movie, so let me know in the comments if you want to see me make more like this in the future. I would love to make a proper video reviewing the movie at some point, and maybe also discuss some alternative routes that Scott could have gone to help make the story a bit more understandable for somebody that's not versed in FNAF lore, while also remain entertaining to those of us that are really big FNAF fans. And with that, I'm gonna head out. So I have a little saying here. I hope you have a great sleep. I hope both sides of your pillow are nice and cold. Okay, bye.